All right, great. I'm here with my friend and colleague and partner, Laura Moreno Lucas, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be I think this is one of the more important conversations that I've had in this podcast because I personally think that small business growth, venture capital, entrepreneurship is one of the biggest tools that we have to close the Latino wealth gap in America. And that's what we're talking about here. I have kind of a funky name to this podcast, if you don't know already. I call it Govies, Plutes, and Gangsters.
I see.
And Govies meaning some people think that, it's going to take a lot of government intervention to move the ball forward. Then you got the Plutes who think just the opposite. Most of them think we need less government. What we need is more capital, right?
Right.
So those are the capitalists. And then third are the gangsters. And these are people who don't necessarily fall into one bucket or the other. They just do what comes natural. They get up every morning, they kick ass, they build great businesses. They're just, mavericks.
Yeah.
And I think we need all three, frankly, if we're
Agreed.
going to really make a difference. The wealth gap is a big deal. Latinos, I think on average, the last I saw, have 1/6 of the wealth of the non-Hispanic white population. Saul likes to call them the Anglo population. That gap is not just significant as it pertains to Latinos. I think it's important, and it's a gap that's significant as it pertains to the country. Because as Latinos become a bigger part of our workforce, a bigger part of our consumerism, if they're not doing well financially, the country's not going to do well financially. Fair enough?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
So we're partners in Latitude Ventures.
Yes.
And you have a really impressive background, I must admit.
Thank you.
But tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm originally from Guadalajara, Mexico, Tapatía. I do speak Spanish. I read it and write it, and I don't claim to know business Spanish or venture Spanish because that's a
Is
whole.
there such a thing?
There is. Because that's a whole
Actually,
nother level.
LATAM's actually huge right now for venture.
Yeah, it's growing, and it's interesting because I do have some calls with LATAM founders, and it's understanding their language and saying emprendedores and all of the things that you need to understand to speak to them. But then a lot of it just really translates because, venture, like you said, has typically gone to a certain group. So we just keep using those same nomenclatures.
And that's actually a great point because, I don't come from that field.
Yeah.
I'm in the mortgage banking space, the housing space. Venture wasn't even on my radar screen. I started the Latitude event with Saul. We both discussed how important it was to have some content focused on getting more capital to the Latino community, to small businesses and so forth. It led to starting a fund, and I've found the experience very, very interesting, inspiring. But I've also noticed that the venture capital world is very small, and it's kind of cliquish, and it feels like a bit of a boys' club, and it's very hard to break into.
Yeah.
And so, tell us how you got into that business.
Yeah, and I think that what's very interesting about venture capital is that it has been traditionally a closed door ecosystem, as well as like Wall Street, because that kind of feeds into eventually Wall Street. And just taking a step back, I think one of the things culturally that at least from what I feel our parents and everybody ingrains in us is like, you have to if you're building a business, it has to make money, right? And so asking someone else for money to share in your dream, it's kind of this weird thing that we don't understand very clearly.
That's a very good point. It's a very good point.
So when I was a founder, there was no way that I ever even thought about going after venture money when I was creating my business, because I was like, well, why would they want to invest in me if I don't even have sales, or if I don't even have a dollar to show for in my idea? But yet I had counterparts. I have this great idea, and let me go ask, this venture capitalist for millions of dollars for my great idea. And I was like, well, why would they give you that money? Because you're not making any money. So they're just going to do that based on your idea? Why? Who are you? You know? And so
So
I think
you got into the business
Yeah.
as an entrepreneur, as a founder yourself.
Exactly,
first.
exactly.
And you wanted to grow your business.
Yeah.
And somebody said you should raise some capital from investors.
Yeah.
Is that how it went? Or?
It went a little different. What happened was, I actually had a 9 to 5, and I was working at TD Ameritrade, and I've always loved fashion. My grandmother taught me how to sew, and everybody would always make fun of me when I'd go to these big sales meetings with all men, because I had my big suitcase with all my shoes and all my clothes, and I wanted to look best in these meetings. And they were like, "Wow, Laura, you really take pride in like showing up with different outfits for the day and at night." And I said, "Yeah, I love to dress up. It's what my mother always told me, te tienes que vestir bien. You have to look presentable." And so I always loved fashion, and then I started creating my own designs. And then when Facebook
And you didn't study that in school?
No, my grandmother just taught me how to sew, and I always sewing my own dresses. And so then when Facebook came out, I just started my own Facebook, dress store. But, no idea that anybody would like the dresses that I was putting in that store. And next thing I know, I'm, working at TD Ameritrade, and I have people actually ordering them off my Facebook store. So I'm like, I got to go home and make this dress and ship it out to this person. So I was getting, small orders here and there. And this is the time where I feel like, online and offline fashion was really developing. It was becoming...
How long ago was this?
This was in 2008, 2009.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And where people were, exploring more of this online shopping ecosystem, and there were new models coming out. And so there was this gentleman in Canada who started a big online shopping model in Canada. And he got a visa, and he came to the Bay Area. And so, again, I was doing this thing, again, part-time. And then the next thing I said, well, I'm going to do a fashion show in San Francisco. And so, I love events, love networking. And so I had this big fashion show, and somehow there was an investor in the crowd and saw this fashion show, and he's like, "You're amazing. I love your designs. What are you doing with this?" And his name was Enrico, and he was an investor for Gucci.
Really?
For Gucci, yeah.
Wow.
And so then he said,
he's like a scout. He goes and looks for
so he was also starting a fashion accelerator, but his background was Gucci.
Okay.
And so then he said, "Hey, what are you thinking about doing with your business?" And I was like, that I'm just doing fashion. And he's like, "I have somebody you should meet." So he basically had me meet this other guy from Canada who had already launched this online model, but it was a guy who really didn't know about fashion. And so he connected us and said, "Here's the person that has all,
So he was a tech guy.
He was a tech guy.
Building a platform.
Yeah, exactly. And so I brought more of the business, the fashion side of things.
Product.
Yeah, exactly. And so he put us together, and so he basically put us together and created what was later known as La Da Da, which was a fashion subscription service that I sold.
Wow.
And that's what I went out to go raise money for.
So you did. That led to you going out and raising some venture capital.
That's right.
So you capitalized your business. You started to build some scale. I'm sure you weren't making every individual dress anymore at that point.
No. Yeah, no. Once he put us together, he brought his breadth of expertise in terms of like manufacturing. I got connected to a bunch of manufacturers out of Shanghai, out of Australia, out of LA. We were, also starting to bring other designs.
Yeah. You don't know any better.
No.
You thought this would be a cool side hustle, and
Yeah. Well, then TD Ameritrade was like, "What are you doing?" Because I was like, and my dad's like, no dejes tu trabajo. He's like, "What are you doing?"
That's your job.
Yeah, and it was, it was a great job. And so he goes, "You can't leave your 9 to 5." I said, "This thing has legs. It's taking off. it's making money on its own. We had a lot of guidance from Enrico on how to really scale it, and it started to make money on its own. Again, no venture capital taken. And then after it started scaling on its own, that's when we started looking for investors.
So it was self-funded in the beginning?
It was self-funded
wow.
at the beginning.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So you had a successful run, right? You were a successful founder.
Yeah.
Sold your company. I'm sure you made a little money. That's okay.
Yeah.
And then you thought, I learned something about the financial markets, venture capital, angel investing, something, all that clicked. And of course, I also know that your husband is a founder himself. And how did you guys meet? How did that happen?
Yeah, my husband's a CTO. He's an engineer. He's a technical founder, which is incredible, because the one thing that when I was a founder and as I was building our business, it's just incredible how much technology allows you to scale and how much it's needed and how much you need to understand about that. And so that was something that I was lacking. But did
you meet him?
I met him
had your
during.
Business, or?
Yeah, I met him during. We just had started dating.
Okay.
He came to one of the fashion shows that I put on. So we had just started dating.
What was he doing there?
I know, right?
To a fashion
show. He said, you had a lot of really fantastic looking friends, so I'm gonna go hang out. So so then we started dating, and he gave me a lot of guidance through the growth of the business on how to build the front end, the back end, the user experience, the conversion, how to really set up everything to track the metrics, the data. The most valuable thing that we had was the data. So we had all of the components where if we sent out a box where it was a subscription model and you had 5 dresses that you sent out and all of these dresses were categorized, we'd get more information that we would send the retailer too.
Wow.
Yeah, so there was a lot of technology that I had to understand that he had tremendous background in, and that was extremely helpful. I don't think that if he hadn't have been involved, I would have been able to scale it the way I did, because he shared, he gave me some tips on how to cut costs, because engineering is so expensive. So I had my own little right-hand engineer that was kind of helping me navigate, and my co-founder navigate through times. But yeah, he's incredible. He's exited 4 companies. And
exited means?
So he had an IPO. So
really? Okay.
Yeah,
so one of the companies that he started went public.
They went public and then got acquired by Fox.
Okay.
Yeah. So it went public, and
so it was a media company?
No, it's credible.com.
Okay.
It's a student loan company.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So him and his co-founder started it, very successful.
So I know what an exit is, but I just wanted people to understand what you meant by that. So
there's, you can exit in a couple different ways. You can get acquired, you can go public, then you can go public and be taken private again, and then go public again. So there's a lot of ways to exit.
So subsequent to that, you got connected to the financial markets. You ended up working at NASDAQ.
Yep.
And so
that was incredible.
How long were you there?
3 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And
so you must have made some great contacts.
That, if I had to say what NASDAQ did for my career, is it put me in a position to meet some of the strongest and really predominant leaders in business.
Period.
Yeah. I was always involved. Like when we were talking to Uber, you had, Dara across, and then the board members that were behind him sitting at a table. And Uber, quite frankly, is a global company.
Sure.
Airbnb, you had the CFO, you had the founders that grew this business to incredible scales, and then all of their investors, all of the bankers, just the entire ecosystem that supports these companies to take them to billions of dollars. And I will say, what I did notice in a lot of those meetings, and a lot of those closed door meetings, is number one, I was normally the only woman, and number two, definitely the only Latina or Latino in the room.
Yeah, that's a reality.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. So congratulations, incredible
Thank
career. Somehow you and I became business partners.
I know.
Saul Trujillo, who's, we both know as a force of nature of sorts, prolific business person. Really, he doesn't like it when I say this, but I call him the elder statesman of Latinos in corporate America, essentially, because nobody really preceded him as a CEO, U.S.-born Latino, that is. And, what he's done with his career is just phenomenal. And, I've gotten to know him really well because, I'm the one who came to him with the idea of doing this scaled event. And, he had his own ideas on how to make it even better. And, he had gone to places like the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and the Aspen Ideals Festival. So he had, he had been to elite conferences that attracted, the movers and shakers of the business world. And I had run a pretty successful real estate organization, and we did great conferences as well. And, I had a nice network. And together we were able to launch Latitude. But we didn't want Latitude just to be this cool event where people came and listened to speeches and, had cocktails and did some networking. We wanted it to be purpose-driven. We wanted it to have an agenda. We want to have some goals attached to it. And, access to capital is at the center of that. So we started, with a baby step. We had a tiny fund, $2 million. We invested in a handful of companies. And we both said, hey, we should try to do something bigger. Now, Saul said $100 million, and, I kind of like, really? $100 million? But, I've learned not to doubt him. So we did that. Kenny was a partner from the very beginning. He had a relationship with you. You guys must have known each other, you and Kenny. How did we end up with you? How did that happen?
So it's, life works in mysterious ways. So, yes, you guys had this incredible conference going on, and then we had COVID hit.
Yep.
And everybody was at home going like, what do we do with our lives because we can't go anywhere? And then you started seeing more and more of these conferences go online. So somehow I got obviously very focused on helping our community. After I left NASDAQ, I started consulting, doing a lot of the same things that I was doing at NASDAQ in terms of helping companies go public and helping them think about their capital structure. But then obviously we all saw what happened, after the events during COVID, and the focus that shifted towards really helping the Black and Brown community. And I started hearing more about
the George Floyd,
and and so
national dialogue during that time. Yeah,
exactly. And so then I started hearing more about Latitude and it going online, and I joined online.
Oh, you did?
I did. I joined online. I didn't know Kenny. I didn't know. Had heard about Soul, and everything you guys were talking about. And I remember when he was talking to Jim Cramer, he had a bunch of a segment on that and talking about Wall Street and talking about media and all this stuff. And all I kept remembering was I was sitting in my living room going, yes, this guy gets it. This guy gets it. I need to talk to him. I'm like, I need to talk to him. How do I talk to him? Who knows him? Like, I didn't know Soul. So I started I'm like, somebody must know him. Who knows him? So I just started going through my network, and somebody knew that Kenny was working with him. And so they connected me. Jesse Martinez connected me to Kenny. And I talked to Kenny right after, in 2020, right after that happened. And, I was so excited. So I just gave him all my excitement speech. And he was like, kind of heads down, very busy,
We know Kenny.
He's like, okay, sounds great. I'll talk to you, sounds good. Send me something. So I keep sending him things, and I'm like, hey, this guy's not really paying attention to me. I don't know what's going on here, but I got to get his attention again. And I don't know, I think it was because I was very persistent, and I kept sending him data points and information.
And why? You obviously, you were successful in your own right. You worked at NASDAQ, or you had your own business, why were you so persistent pursuing Kenny and Sol?
I think because of the national conversation, again, like you pointed, of what happened to George Floyd, and then people discussing like access to capital and not understanding the dynamics of Wall Street and the private and public markets. And I had that view. I knew what was going on in the private markets and what was happening at the later stage of the public markets and why these dynamics were happening. And so I was trying to educate. I was doing, video podcast and sharing information just because I wanted to, and I kept sending those newsletters and information to Kenny and to really everybody who was part of the PandoCap community. And so somehow, I don't know if it was one of them that really hit with him, and he called me and he's like, "Hey, what's going on with you? What are you up to?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Let's chat. There's a lot going on, and so let's have a conversation. And what do you have going on?" I said, "Well, actually, I'm working with this company, and I'm doing syndicates, raising money for a really fantastic company that I found, and I'm working with a few other companies." And he's like, "Really? Tell me more."
And that company was which?
Flow.
Yeah, Flow. Okay, that's
Flow.
right.
And so he ended up actually being very interested in this company, and that's where we ended up doing a deal together with Flow, and you guys were the biggest investor at that time. And yeah, and then from there he's like, "Well, do you have any more of these?" And I'm like, I actually do. I have more, but they have to be Latinos. I'm like, "I know a lot of Latinos. Yeah, I have more for you." And so then, I started working, and he goes, "And I happen to have this big event called Latitude that's happening in 2 months. Can you help me?" And I said, "Okay." Like the one that you guys had online last year? He's like, "Yeah, that one, but it's in person, and it's thousands of people, and it's going to be in San Diego." I said, "Sure, I can help. This is what, I'm kind of working on this other stuff." And again, I was consulting.
I think that was the first time I met you.
Yeah.
In person. Yeah.
And that was the first time, and here we are.
Yeah. So you joined the team.
Yeah.
You became part of a partner of Latitude Ventures. And so let's shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about what we're trying to accomplish there and why we think it's important. So we raised $100 million, and we've already invested some of that money. Mm-hmm. One of the things that people told me when Sol and I were talking about doing Latitude Ventures was, you're going to have a hard time finding companies to invest in. There aren't that many Latino-led startups that are investable. I don't know if that's a word, but you know what I'm saying. Investment quality firms.
Yeah.
And so you guys are going to have to broaden your scope a little bit, because if you're only going to invest in Latino-led startups, you're going to run out of prospects pretty quickly. I have not found that to be the case.
No.
And you would agree, right? So
100%.
In fact, I would say that if we had $500 million, we'd find a place for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is a lot of talent out there. Now, there is a certain way that the venture world has operated.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those barriers that I think we have to, there's knowledge gaps out there that we need to address.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in terms of the venture world, it's always looked at as, who are the founders? Is their product market fit? Do they have capital behind them? What's the technology scale? All of these different components. And then you have to understand, again, how to work through the VC ecosystem in terms of who to pitch, how to pitch, and how to position it.
There is a whole language, and there's a
is.
whole process. And I remember our first few meetings, I thought you guys were talking a different language. I was like, what? What are you guys talking about? But I understand that, right?
Yeah.
And I do think I have a theory that Wall Street intentionally tries to make things sound more complicated than it actually is, because that's
100%.
how it keeps their little clicks going. But there is some truth to it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to be able to make a judgment about whether or not a company is investment quality, whether or not a company is worth X versus Y, you have to have some metrics to look at, and you want companies to be able to present themselves in a certain way.
Yeah.
Correct?
That's correct. I mean, there's definitely, like they say, art, science, what there definitely is kind of a recipe that you look for, but then a lot of it is just your gut instinct, because 100% of it has to do with the person. you know?
I look at the numbers. Let's talk about the data for a second, and it's not encouraging. I don't know what the number is, but it's less than 2%.
Yes.
Of investment, venture capital.
So there's two stats. There's less than 2% of venture capital, and there's less than 1% of all capital, whether it's early or later stage, because you're also including private equity.
So less than 2% of venture capital that's invested every year goes to Latino-led startups.
Correct.
We're almost 20% of the population here in the U.S.
Right.
We get less than 2% of the capital. When you move further down the food chain and you include private equity and growth capital, that actually drops to below 1%.
That's right.
So even our $100 million is a drop in the bucket.
Right.
In the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But we have a chance to demonstrate something, right? And that is that there are viable investments to be had, there is money to be made, and that the people who have capital are losing out if they aren't looking at this sector or this demographic as a great growth opportunity. Fair enough?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's going to take, it's going to take us, and it's going to take a lot of our ecosystem to come together to support these founders, to get them through the process. Because what you typically see in terms of the capital structure is that a lot of us can get them to maybe Series B or Series C, and then the same structure that's been there that you're talking about, that's a closed structure where the money goes, they take over, and then they're the ones who either start to restructure the company or sell it or move the founders, or a lot of changes happen. So it benefits us if we work, not only Latitude Ventures, but the whole Latino ecosystem that is in this works together to help them grow beyond just early stage startups.
Right, and that's the key. Cano Health. It's a kind of a story. It was before I knew Sol, unfortunately, but when I think it's probably been 6 years now. The founders of Cano Health, Dr. Hernandez and Dr. Aguilar, reached out to Sol cold. They didn't know him.
Wow.
And they said they had an idea, and they had an idea for a new healthcare business. And Sol liked the idea. He became their first investor. He put $1 million into their business. The business was doing about $1 million a year in EBITDA. And fast forward 5 years, they go public on the New York Stock Exchange.
Yep.
Sorry, not NASDAQ, but
No, it's
New York
okay.
Stock Exchange.
Both great.
With like a $5 billion valuation.
Yeah.
Lots of wealth created for the investors, a lot of wealth created for the founders.
Amazing.
A lot of the investors were Latino. Obviously, Sol is one of them. It's a great story.
Fantastic story.
And
very few.
had they not reached out to Sol, who had experience in the financial markets, who could help put a board together, probably never would have happened, right? And we believe that there are probably hundreds of stories like that that could have been,
right,
or still out there to be had. This is what inspires me. I have a thesis, and you and I talked about that a little bit. And I think that when these Latino-led startups actually do become successful, when they achieve scale, it's great for all the participants and the investors and the founders and the employees, but something else happens, and that is they attract more capital. The guys who have money look at that and say, we're not going to let you make all the profit here. We need to find our own gig. We need to invest more money into those markets. And in theory, at least, a lot of those new entrepreneurs, a lot of the employees that are going to be Latino as well, right?
Yes.
I say all the time, whether it's true or not, I believe that Oprah Winfrey and Tyler Perry have done more for blacks in the entertainment industry than 50 years worth of political advocacy.
Yeah.
Because they proved the model, they made money, they showed how to create products to reach that marketplace, and now everybody is jumping in trying to get a piece of that market, right? That's the dynamic that we want to create at Latitude Ventures, no?
That is exactly the dynamic. And that is the dynamic that has been happening in other communities. And so a great example is what is known as the PayPal Mafia. So I don't know if you know the PayPal Mafia.
A little bit.
Yeah, PayPal Mafia is Elon Musk, and there was another gentleman by Peter Thiel.
Yep.
And then another Max. And so all of them were part of originally PayPal. Now, if you think about, obviously, they all made a lot of money after they exited PayPal, but then what happened next? All of them went out and started another business. And so guess what happened? All the investors that were part of the PayPal exit and that ecosystem that said, of course, we're going to give you more money to start this other business. And then they had wealth to, again, create these new businesses, which now are tremendous. You know, all of them have tremendous businesses. And now, you know, Peter Thiel has his own investment vehicle.
Yep.
So that innately
I think he was
created...
the first investor in Facebook.
Yeah, I think he was one of the first. Yeah. And so what we see is like that example is how it snowballs into building this wealth in the community.
Exactly.
So that's the playbook that we have to take and make sure that we continue to support entrepreneurs all the way up to these exits so that they can build that wealth and then put it back into the ecosystem, and then other capital, as you said, will come and they'll follow.
So at the very beginning, you started to talk about one of the barriers, and that is Latino business owners, business people, whatever we want to call them, don't necessarily like the idea of some stranger investing in their company. I don't know if it's cultural or it's just a lack of experience or whatever the case may be. It's true, and we know that's the case, right? So what do you say to that? I mean, how do we at least expand that vision a little bit?
Yeah, it is cultural because, I mean, my experiences with money, you know, I don't come from money, so I've always had a very interesting relationship with money, and I think our community does. And so, you know, we like to see money. And that's how we kind of progress. We're like, okay, I'm making this money. Here's like save it. My dad would always tell me to save. So it's a different dynamic that I think that we have to get used to, allowing investors and trusting not just any investor, right? Because I think it has to be the right investor and a strategic investor that could really help. And I think we come from a perspective of, hey, we are you.
Yep.
We have those experiences, and we have people who have worked in the industry, like Sol, like Oscar, like you, who have built incredible companies at scale and can give you that feedback on how to do that.
People don't understand that should be at least half of the whole model around venture capital. So some great stories there. Sol's already done incredible things for some of the companies we've invested in. We call them portfolio companies, right?
Yes.
And I know he's matched a couple up with Target, because he used to be on the board of Target.
Right.
He matched another one with, I think, the former CEO of Pepsi North America. Saul was on the board of Pepsi. I can think of a few others, but Qualcomm, we connected one of our portfolio companies with Qualcomm. There's not a lot of people who can open those types of doors. That's got to be part of it as well. Yeah. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of Latinos who served in the C-suites of a lot of these big, Fortune 100 type companies. So, right now, you and I and Sol and Kenny and Oscar, we have a lot of, I don't want to say pressure, but a lot of responsibility to deliver on this.
Yes.
Because hopefully our success as a venture capital firm will cascade out to a lot of our friends and peers who also have funds, other Latinos that are trying to do the same thing, who generally have relatively small funds, but I think we're probably the first Latino-led venture capital fund to reach the $100 million threshold.
That's correct.
And hopefully there'll be 10 more that follow in the next few years. And then we start to, I think things start to parlay and get interesting at that point. More capital, more startups, more companies achieving scale, more wealth created. All of that just creates this domino effect that we're striving for, right?
That's absolutely correct. And like I was saying earlier, it's going to take all of our community to come together. Yes, we have this incredible opportunity to just really changed the face for entrepreneurship. But again, I was talking to another VC. I was like, we got to all work together. We got to, identify these and help support them, because it's going to be a benefit to all of us.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to go back to Kano for a second and to piggyback on what you just said, when Saul was helping them raise additional capital, he really wanted to raise as much of it as possible from other Latinos.
Yes.
Folks that had money, who could write checks, because he wanted to keep it in the family. He knew this company was going to be successful, and he wanted the beneficiaries of that. We don't think about that very often. We think about the company itself.
Yeah.
But he wanted the beneficiaries of that success to also be Latino. And, I don't think people have thought that way, at least thought it through that way. Maybe you have to that degree, but I think that's important as well.
No, not in the past. I think recently. Even prior to joining Latitude, I was asking some of the companies that were going to IPO, I said, hey, you're about to let these traditional investors make tons of money on your IPO. Can we carve out like 5 or 10% for some diverse LPs? I know some people who are Latino,
yeah.
who can help here, and that kind of got me thinking.
Yep.
And so.
Well, I got me thinking too. Mm-hmm. And as you know, I'm the co-founder of NAREP.
Yes.
And still, it's my day job and my passion, but I want to create an angel investor network within the NAREP network.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of people who are interested in it. They've made pretty good money over the last couple of years. They've got money to invest. They don't know anything about investing in startups because it seems so specialized and so technical. But if we do it right, we can bring people who have that expertise. Individual investors can invest, small checks, $5,000. They don't have to come up with a lot of money. And they can pick and choose the companies that they want to invest in. But even further, if it's a prop tech company or a fintech company, we might be able to help accelerate that company by introducing it to our members, by talking to the people who we know in the industry. All those things can really help these companies,
and that's huge.
catalyze.
Market validation is huge. And you have a platform of, like you said, thousands of people that can give market validation really quickly and product market fit. And that is something that any startup would just love and get, and that can very quickly give them scale and opportunities that nobody else has. So
when I interviewed Sol, I talked to him about the fact that there wasn't a lot of Latino representation or Latina representation in C-suites, Fortune 500 type companies. And I said, why? And he said there's a lot of reasons why, and some of it's on us, and we talked about that a little bit. And I want to sort of ask you the same question, right? Those numbers of 1%, 2%, we want to change those things. Some of it is definitely, not our fault, but maybe some of it is on us. What do people need to do? What do our gente needs to do differently to change those numbers and start to get more capital flowing into our communities?
Yeah, I think that one thing that's been interesting to see, and I think Sol is doing a great job of it, is showing that transparency of like, hey, I think there was a report that just came out the other day that said there's like only 2 Latina CEOs in the United States.
Period.
Yeah.
None in Fortune 500 companies.
Right. And so that was shocking, but not shocking. So I think, number one, we need to understand like governance processes in companies and what that means. Again,
No, but my question is around venture. How do we get more Latinos in this business? How do we get more Latinos, founders how do they get into this ecosystem that we're talking about here today?
Yeah, so I think it's a two-prong approach. One is it has to absolutely start at the educational level, and I see so many Latinas and Latinos now being interested in this space, and I think there's a lot of new programs coming out. in the educational system in, Stanford and UC and a lot of programs. There's a Latinx MBA program that's from MIT, Harvard, and all
Yep.
these elite schools. And they're building kind of programs to help even a broader base of Latinos come together that aren't part of those ecosystems, because again, that's also a tight
And a
ecosystem.
few of those students we've hired as interns.
Yes, we have. We have some great
get 'em some
interns.
experience, yeah.
Yeah, we have some great interns. But I think it takes that, starting getting those people exciting and understanding of what, and giving them opportunities, because then they can go back out and say, hey, this is what they do, this is what was cool, and allowing them to network and build that interest. And then after that, then it's helping along the way understand sort of the next steps in growth on, hey, how do you break into venture, giving them opportunities. If we don't have those opportunities within Latitude, connecting them to other venture capital firms that
Right.
are looking for that talent. And there's a lot that are looking for that talent right now, because again, I don't know if anyone notices this, but generally you don't see job postings for venture.
Right. Right. That's what I'm saying. It's this clique. It's this boys club. It's this,
I remember when I started going through, like, after I exited my company, I was like, maybe I'll go do venture before I went to NASDAQ. And honestly, I had no idea to where to start to apply. How does that work? And then I started to educate myself on it, and I was
there's
like,
a lot
oh,
of venture capital firms that don't take calls.
No.
They don't receive emails. They
No.
don't do interviews.
no. So it's, again, changing the GP landscape, which we're doing a great job of, being all Latinos, changing the entire firm landscape, hiring interns, hiring associates that are
Yep.
Latino and Latinas, and then helping them outside of that by building the ecosystems that help educate through NAREP, through Latitude, and supporting them and through the educational system.
Well, I'm glad that you pestered Kenny the way you did.
I don't know if you knew that story.
I didn't know that story
that's
until right
so
now.
Funny.
So I'm glad you did. It's been great knowing you for a year. I know we're just beginning.
Yes.
It's starting to get exciting. It's starting to get fun. There was a big announcement a couple days ago. Obviously, that was really, I was really proud to see all that. And it's on us now. It's on us now to make it work and
That's
to
right.
prove the model and to open doors for others. I am big on entrepreneurship. I think it's one of the keys to closing the wealth gap, and I'm glad that I'm in the epicenter of it, and I'm glad I'm working with you, Laura.
Thank you, Gary. I'm very excited. I've enjoyed the ride so far, and I've learned so much from, your mentorship, from Sol, from Kenny, and from Oscar, from the short period that he's been involved. It's been great, and I think the thing that just really drives me is just seeing how great our founders and appreciative they are to be able to have this opportunity. So that's amazing. So I look forward to all the wins we have to come.
Absolutely. Thank you.